The most terrible punishments faced by women in the Imperial Chinese court. Envision yourself as a cherished concubine within the forbidden city's crimson walls, adorned in lustrous silk the shade of autumn persimmons, delicate jasmine essence wafting from your embroidered sleeves. The palatial gardens shimmer with dawn's amber light as a eunuch prostrates himself so deeply his forehead touches the polished marble floors. For this fleeting instant, the imperial palace seems the universe's epicenter, and you stand within its sacred heart. Then the imperial summons arrives. No clarification provided, no opportunity to mentally prepare. Guards grasp your arms with iron resolve. The precious silk slides from your frame, supplanted by rough hemp cordage that gnaws against your flesh. You're escorted beyond ornate lacquered panels depicting soaring phoenixes, each footfall resonating with the reality you've always understood yet never dared acknowledge. Within these hallowed halls, imperial approval proves as delicate as porcelain in trembling hands. Throughout the Qing dynasty's reign, magnificence and submission might bestow precious gems upon the fortunate, yet defiance or merely its appearance could obliterate everything cherished. Historical documents from the 18th century detail retributions that converted golden palaces into iron prisons. A solitary whispered allegation could result in the cangue, that massive timber collar weighing approximately 55 pounds, its harsh edges abrading skin until every breath became laborious struggle. Occasionally, the chastisement came swiftly, being hauled before the Empress Dowager, whose singular command could extinguish existence before evening descended. Scholarly debate continues regarding whether the court's brutality reflected imperial paranoia or constituted a precisely calculated dominance mechanism. Regardless, statistical evidence speaks volumes. During specific reigns, nearly 1 of every 10 palace women encountered formal punishment annually, exceeding rates found in certain penal institutions. Testimonials from Jesuit diplomatic observers document this paradox. Ladies draped in golden brocade seated alongside those shackled in iron fetters, occupying identical ornate chambers as though such juxtaposition represented normalcy. The most disturbing element remained that punishment didn't necessarily follow transgression. Sometimes retribution preceded offense as cautionary display for others. You might remain ignorant of which rumor or envious whisper ignited the flames beneath your feet. The midwives, seamstresses, and eunuchs all served as silent observers. Yet none would meet your gaze as hemp bindings constricted tighter. The silk garments and metal restraints weren't symbolic metaphors within the Qing palace. They constituted actual implements that could exchange handlers instantaneously. Those who had previously served tea to the Son of Heaven might discover themselves chained within identical courtyards where they once performed graceful dances for his entertainment. Imperial legal codes such as the Da Qing Lu detail punishments for palace women with clinical precision, flogging, imprisonment, cangue restraint, and in exceptional circumstances, execution through prolonged methods. Each penalty carried not merely physical agony, but public spectacle designed to obliterate dignity entirely. One documented case from 1722 tells of a concubine accused of insulting another favored woman. She received orders to wear the cangue for 30 days within the primary courtyard, her tresses deliberately unbound as a calculated mark of shame. During daylight hours, scorching sun blistered the exposed flesh of her neck. Throughout darkness, the wooden framework rendered sleep impossible. The official record concludes with the notation, "restored to service," yet no subsequent mention of her appears in palace registers. Several historians propose she may have continued existence as a mute attendant, stripped of rank and identity. During the mid-18th century, Empress Dowager Cixi revived ancient punishments, combining them with innovative methods designed to humiliate rather than simply kill. A peculiar detail emerges from confidential correspondence among palace staff. Silken cords were sometimes substituted for hemp when punishing favored offenders, not as an act of compassion, but as deliberate mockery. The silk deteriorated more rapidly, necessitating frequent reknotting, which carved deeper wounds over time. By the century's conclusion, these punishments had evolved into ritualized warnings. The palace functioned simultaneously as stage and penitentiary, where every woman understood her role could be rewritten overnight. Within the emperor's court, chains perpetually awaited, whether they gleamed in gold or chafed in coarse fiber. The cangue was not the sole apparatus designed to transform a living woman into a silent, cautionary tale. Within the narrow covered passages of the Forbidden City existed a location informally termed the Gallery of Silence. Here, transgressors, typically palace servants or minor consorts, were compelled to stand for hours or days wearing heavy wooden restraints, their spines pressed against frigid brick walls, their limbs swelling until they could scarcely support their own mass. This punishment was intended to remain visible to all who passed, yet none dared to meet the prisoner's eyes. One imperial decree from 1768 describes a favored concubine accused of disrupting harem harmony through gossip spreading. The verdict came swiftly: 30 days in the gallery wearing a modified cangue so she could be relocated daily to increasingly public locations. She stood through sweltering summer heat and piercing autumn winds, her ornate footwear disintegrating into tatters. By her sentence's end, she could no longer walk unassisted, and her position in the emperor's favor had evaporated completely. Historians continue debating whether these punishments served purely as discipline or as theatrical performance, carefully orchestrated acts to remind the entire court that obedience equaled survival. Within a palace housing over 3,000 women, the terror of public humiliation proved as effective as any physical restraint. Some Western ambassadors recorded their horror at this blend of refinement and cruelty. A woman wearing a jeweled headdress, face pallid from exhaustion, hands bound, yet posture forced upright for hours under silent eunuch supervision. The cangue itself constituted a device of layered degradation. Some versions bore inscriptions of the offender's crime in black ink for all to read. The wooden boards were deliberately shaped to prevent the wearer from feeding herself, compelling dependence upon others for basic survival. Comparisons with imprisonment outside the palace reveal striking differences. In common courts, the cangue was typically worn for days or weeks. Within the Forbidden City, sentences could extend into months, especially for women suspected of disloyalty or covert alliances. A haunting account emerges from the late 18th century. A palace seamstress, punished for mishandling the empress's robe, began softly reciting children's lullabies to herself. Hour after hour, eunuchs ignored her, though one reportedly tightened her restraints each morning to prevent slouching. 2 weeks later, she had vanished, officially transferred to exterior kitchens, though no one there recalled her arrival. Even smaller, almost absurd variations of restraint existed. Wooden frames designed to force women into specific postures, or massive headdresses functioning as weights. An odd detail appears in the 1820 diary of a palace tutor. Some women were compelled to wear wide bamboo frames around their waists, not for immobilization, but to prevent sitting or reclining. This punishment could persist for days, and the discomfort reportedly exceeded that of flogging. During the middle of punishment periods, the body deteriorated, yet the palace's daily rituals never ceased. Musicians continued performing in grand halls. Banquets still perfumed the air with aromatic roasted fowl and chrysanthemum tea. For the punished, the sounds of merriment and silk shoes clicking against stone served as constant reminders of the life hovering just beyond reach. The gallery was not merely a place of endurance, it was a place of disappearance. Women sent there for brief punishment sometimes never returned. Official records remained deliberately vague, listing them as transferred or reassigned. But the silence in servants' quarters told a different story entirely. In the Forbidden City, to stand too long in the open risked vanishing altogether. From the gallery, there existed a fate even more dreaded: exile to the Leng Gong, the cold palace. This was not a palace in any romantic sense, but a collection of abandoned courtyards and desolate halls on the forbidden city's remote edges, where sunlight seemed reluctant to penetrate. Women sent there were not executed. Their punishment proved slower, quieter, and in some ways far crueler than death. The cold palace housed those who had lost favor beyond any possibility of recovery, concubines accused of betrayal, widowed consorts whose protectors had perished, or women caught in political machinations they never initiated. Once dispatched there, you remained technically alive, still counted among the palace's inhabitants, but in reality, you had already become a specter haunting empty corridors. Historical records from the Ming and Qing dynasties note that the cold palace often lacked sufficient heating during winter months, despite the name being more symbolic than literal. In Beijing's brutal sub-zero winters, this meant sleeping in threadbare bedding, breath crystallizing in the air. Food was meager: rice porridge, pickled vegetables, occasionally scraps from the main kitchens. Over time, malnutrition hollowed the cheeks and dulled the eyes to lifeless glass. An unusual detail from an 18th century palace ledger reveals that women in the cold palace were assigned no duties, no structured routines. Days dissolved into weeks without purpose, a psychological strategy as effective as any physical restraint. Even eunuchs avoided lingering there, claiming bad omens. One Jesuit visitor described the halls as so profoundly silent that a fallen hairpin could resonate like thunder. The most sinister truth whispered in shadows. No one truly departed the cold palace alive. Rare exceptions existed, usually when a woman was required as testimony in palace intrigue, but most never again felt sunlight outside those gates. A chilling comparison. While execution claimed a life within hours, cold palace exile could stretch across decades, a living death measured in changing seasons. One account from the Qianlong era tells of a consort accused of bringing ill fortune after suffering multiple miscarriages. The emperor, unwilling to execute her directly, banished her to the cold palace. For 28 years, she inhabited a single chamber with a shattered window lattice. In summer, mosquito swarms invaded. In winter, frost climbed the walls like ghostly fingers. When she finally died, her remains were quietly removed under cover of darkness, her name absent from the official morning roll call. Even more sinister was how the cold palace served as a weapon without physical walls closing behind you. A low-ranking concubine could be shown its locked gates, its frost-bitten courtyards, and told she would be sent there if she displeased the wrong person. That image alone proved sufficient to ensure absolute obedience. In the Chinese imperial court, erasure of the self could occur long before physical death. The cold palace didn't simply strip away freedom, it stripped away witnesses, leaving the punished to vanish without sound, without record, and without the dignity of proper ending. If exile represented the gradual death, then poisoned gifts constituted the swift one, wrapped in silk, presented with gracious smiles, and accepted with bowed gratitude. In the Chinese imperial court, execution was not always a public spectacle. For women of elevated rank, the emperor or empress dowager might order a private departure, ensuring scandal never spread beyond palace walls. The method was frequently a gift: tea leaves, sweet wine, a delicate porcelain bowl containing poison so subtle that death appeared natural. The most notorious example originates from the Ming dynasty, when consort Wan, accused of conspiring with a rival prince, was presented with a pot of chrysanthemum tea by imperial command. She was informed it represented a gesture of reconciliation. Within an hour, her skin had turned ashen, her breathing slowed, and she was pronounced dead from sudden illness. Court records noted her burial with full honors, carefully omitting the actual cause. Historians continue debating whether these covert executions were acts of mercy to spare public humiliation or calculated moves to protect the court's reputation. In either case, the numbers proved difficult to trace. Official records rarely acknowledge poison. Yet private memoirs of eunuchs and visiting ambassadors suggest it was far from uncommon. Some even claim that during certain reigns, as many as 1 in 5 consort deaths bore the hallmarks of deliberate poisoning. The cruelty lay not only in the act, but in the elaborate performance surrounding it. The gift would be presented during formal ceremony, attendants kneeling, musicians playing softly in the background. To refuse meant treason. To accept meant submission to destiny. Sometimes the condemned was permitted to choose the moment, drinking the poisoned tea in privacy rather than under watchful eyes, but the outcome remained identical. An unusual detail appears in late Qing correspondence. The poison was occasionally mixed with prized delicacies such as bird's nest soup or lychee wine, ensuring the final taste was one of luxury. Whether this was intended as kindness or mockery remains debated among scholars. A haunting case emerges from the Qianlong reign. A high-ranking concubine received a tray of almond pastries, shared them with her 2 most loyal maids, and by nightfall, all 3 were dead. The official account recorded sudden fever and sealed their quarters. The following day, their names were erased from active rosters and their belongings redistributed without ceremony. Foreign observers, like British envoy Sir George Staunton, wrote of the eerily courteous nature of these deaths. No raised voices, no visible struggle, only the quiet closing of doors and the steady disappearance of servants. The following morning, music would play as usual in gardens, and laughter would ripple through halls as if nothing had transpired. Perhaps the most haunting aspect was that no one could be certain when a gift was genuine. A bolt of silk, a basket of fruit, a cup of wine, each could carry both favor and death. In a court where appearances meant survival, every woman learned to smile while accepting the cup, even as her hands trembled beneath silk sleeves. The psychological warfare was perhaps more devastating than physical torture. Living with the knowledge that any gesture of imperial attention might be your last created a state of perpetual terror. Women would examine every gift with microscopic attention, searching for signs of tampering, yet still forced to accept graciously, lest refusal itself be interpreted as defiance. Some developed elaborate rituals, pretending to sip while barely touching lips to cup, or claiming sudden illness to avoid consuming gifts entirely. Yet even these desperate measures carried risks, as suspicious behavior itself could be grounds for punishment. The most sophisticated poisons were said to mimic natural deaths so perfectly that even imperial physicians could not detect their presence. These substances were reportedly imported from distant provinces, their preparation known only to trusted palace alchemists who themselves often met mysterious ends to protect their secrets. The final and most devastating punishment was not necessarily physical, it was complete erasure. In the Chinese imperial court, disgrace could mean having your name obliterated from records, your portraits destroyed, and your family connections formally severed. This was the punishment reserved for those whose fall from grace threatened the throne's very legitimacy. The mechanism was deliberate and thorough. An imperial decree would order the removal of a woman's name from palace rosters, ancestral tablets, and any official correspondence. Her personal seals were shattered, belongings redistributed or burned, and her quarters reassigned as if she had never inhabited them. In the Ming and Qing dynasties, this process was called xiaoming, erasing the name. It was as if the court were extracting her thread from a vast tapestry, closing the gap so seamlessly that no one could discern where she had been. Historians continue debating whether erasure was purely a political act or a cultural ritual aimed at severing the influence of a disharmonious spirit. Some argue it was employed most heavily during periods of political instability when a single scandal could shake the throne's foundation. In scope, the impact was immense. While exile to the cold palace affected the individual, erasure affected entire generations. A woman's descendants could lose rights to take imperial examinations, hold office, or even use certain family names. An unusual detail emerges from an 1824 memorial to the Daoguang emperor. A palace historian reported that after a certain concubine's disgrace, not only were her portraits destroyed, but the artisans who had painted them were ordered to create replacements with altered features for all group scenes where she had once appeared. In this way, even visual memory of her was systematically rewritten. The most chilling case involves Consort Ning in the Ming court. Accused of plotting against the empress, she was first administered poisoned tea. Within hours of her burial, her name was expunged from registries and her family in Suzhou was stripped of all titles. By the following month, no official document bore any trace of her existence. The silence was so complete that even palace staff who had served her were warned never to speak her name again. Foreign observers like Jesuit missionary Jean-Baptiste Regis found the practice both alien and terrifying. He noted that to be erased is to have never been born, describing it as a fate worse than execution because it stole not just life, but identity itself. Compared to the swift end of poison or the drawn-out torment of the gallery, erasure was more insidious. It worked in silence, in the turning of pages, in deliberate gaps in conversation. It was a weapon not of the body but of history itself. In the palace, the dead could linger as names, but those erased were gone even from memory. And that was the emperor's truest power, not just to take life, but to make it as if that life had never existed at all. The corridors stand empty now. The cangues rot in forgotten storerooms, the cold palace courtyards choked with weeds. But the memory of those punishments lingers in surviving records, in the faded ink of foreign envoys, journals, in whispered folk tales told outside the vermilion walls. Even as you step back from the palace gates in your mind, the weight of its rules still follows. The silks, the chains, the gifts, the exile, the erasure, they all served one purpose: to remind every woman inside that the emperor's world was built on obedience, and obedience was enforced with fear. Take a breath now. Let the palace's gold fade from your vision. Let the echo of footsteps soften until they're merely a whisper. Imagine yourself walking away past the frozen courtyards, through gates that will close behind you, but not upon you. The air grows warmer, colors less sharp. Somewhere beyond these walls, the world moves without edicts, without cangues, without silken ropes turned to weapons. You're outside the court's reach now, beyond the silence that was the heaviest chain of all. Remember this feeling. Keep it with you.